So, good morning. Everybody can hear me? Great. So as you said, I'm Geir Sjurseth, and I represent Apogee. Apogee was recently acquired by Google, and I'm delighted to be here today together with our partners Yale Group to talk to you a bit about APIs and your business and how APIs can be an acceleration factor and ultimately a transformation factor for your business. So what you see here are screenshots of a number of different applications running on mobile phones. And there's kind of a travel theme associated with this. But I thought I would start by kind of telling you my own travel story when I came here. So I was at home. I was running a little late. My dog had an ear infection, and I had to deal with him that morning. But I had to get to the airport. So I asked my Google Home when the next bus was going to come, so I could take the bus with my luggage and ultimately make it to the airport. It gave me that time. I went to the bus. I used my bus card to pay for that bus ride into Central Station. Once there, I looked up when the next transport train was going to take me to the airport in Stockholm. Once I got to Stockholm, I downloaded my boarding pass. And then I went through security, checked in, ultimately on my flight. And right before we took off, I used Spotify to download some additional music. Each of these services, with the exception maybe of Spotify, are organizations that aren't really trying to sell you software. These are businesses that are trying to handle other pieces, transportation, payment services between my bank and how I paid for my bus pass. And even Spotify, albeit a digital service, is really about providing me music. So we've kind of seen a transformation in the last 15 years, or at least maybe even longer than that, where there was this notion of web first. What we need to do is to engage the community that's expecting a modern world and build websites. And that worked for a while, and then 2007, 2008, when smartphones started to become the thing, we moved from web first into mobile first. Now we're going to build mobile applications. That's going to be the first thing we do, and we're hoping that our users will use these mobile applications, and they'll move from mobile to the web that we were focusing on before. But the problem with mobile first and web first is that they're different types of implementations. So the world moved away from each of these to something that we're now starting to see, which is API first. And the advantage with API first is that if I build my API, I can connect my mobile applications to it, I can connect my web applications to it, and potentially I can create a whole new set of products and marketing ideas that weren't previously exposed to me before. And you might ask, well, how did this happen? Why is it that APIs have become this new trend? And it's because, as Mark Andreessen said back in 2011, software ate the world, right? And what this means is now we're seeing traditional brick and mortar institutions like financial institutions, banks. So in my example earlier, when I got on the bus to take that bus into Central Station, I paid with my card, and that's because there was an agreed API between the local transit authority and my bank to accept payment there. Probably all of us realize that before we go out and buy any new apparel or technology equipment, we go and we look it up online first, and we'll read reviews. But actually, a lot of times, we buy that thing online proper, and then it gets delivered to us. And healthcare even. I mean, we can go and I can now use an app in Stockholm to talk to a doctor and get diagnosed if I have some kind of problem. That doctor will provide a prescription, and that happens through a secure API in the back end so that when I go to the pharmacy, I can withdraw that prescription automatically. All of this is done through the power of APIs. And ultimately, it started with software, right? So we had a bunch of software that we were using to build these pieces, but software is kind of isolated. What we wanted to do is provide a way for software to talk to your phone, talk to your home, talk to your car. So if I've got something like Google Nest sitting in my home, I can control features in my home. And I might be able to control those features in my home from my phone. My car might be connected online so that it can give me updated traffic information. I actually have something on my car in Stockholm, so it'll tell me where the speed cameras are so that I can slow down without getting a ticket ahead of time, or maybe even potentially where the police are if I want to avoid them as well. And APIs kind of allow these different types of software to talk to each other. Basically, APIs allow the software components that you're already building to have a voice. So now my phone can talk to my watch if I have a watch. I can set an API on something as mundane as my washing machine downstairs so that when it finishes a load of laundry, I can get a notification on my phone so I know it's time to run down to the basement and hang it up. Everything's starting to get connected. But not all APIs are the same. I mean, there's different types of APIs, obviously. So the API that I'm using in my home to talk to my washing machine, or the API that's connecting my watch to my phone or my tablet, isn't the same one as the API that's connecting my bank to the bus that I'm trying to take. So we see in the world that there's kind of three different types of APIs. There are these services APIs, APIs as interactions, and then finally there's APIs as products. And ultimately, it's this idea of APIs as products that allow your business to really transform itself and accelerate into new markets. So APIs or services is kind of the traditional way that we've kind of been working with it all along. So you'll have different applications. An application will create an interface that allows it to receive communication, a sort of contract, so that other applications can consume it, so that a mobile developer community can write mobile applications that can consume it, and so on. And sometimes these APIs will be in front of a backend, right? So you'll have a traditional layer of backend services that you want to expose with APIs. We're also beginning to see this world of microservices where in the past we might have been building very large monolithic traditional applications. Now we're building smaller, more agile pieces of code and duplicating them or running multiple versions of it at the same time. And they communicate to each other via APIs. So this is kind of the first layer. The second layer is APIs as interactions. Now I gave you that washing machine example before, but this could really be anything. I can control lights, I can control my home in general, perhaps I can control my car. Something I'm looking forward to being able to do is, because in Sweden it's very cold, I would like from my phone when I get up in the morning to tell my car to turn on the heat in the cabin of the car, so before I get into it the seat's warm so I don't freeze my butt off before I drive to work. And APIs allow this kind of interaction layer, so these different types of software can communicate with one another, but closer to humans, right? So different from kind of the microservices speaking to one another. And this last piece is APIs as products, and this is where we've got different APIs. We've got a team that are developing the APIs. I've got some kind of API product manager that's measuring the effect of those APIs, and that API product manager is measuring the effect, the accuracy, the success of those APIs based on the API consumers. And those API consumers are just reading the APIs that the API developer community has created. And this creates a virtuous circle so that the more APIs you build, the more that API product manager can measure how well those APIs are working or not working and adjust to create a bigger and more vibrant life cycle and community for these APIs. Okay, and now with all these APIs, there's different types of business models. And these business models lie in kind of different ecosystems, and I'm going to step through a couple of them now just to give some examples. And obviously, not all ecosystems are the same. So we can think of this as concentric circles. So we see different API customers start at different layers. Some people start internal only, some people start at public, and you can kind of blend and bleed between these different notions. But if we start with something like Conrad. So Conrad is a German electronic distributor of different electronic products, TVs and even components in terms of microcontrollers and LEDs and the like. They wanted to create an API ecosystem internally only, and they did this. So they had a bunch of API work done to control how their logistics was done between their different factories, their different warehouses inside of Germany. That worked pretty good, and now they're beginning to expand that to the next level where they're creating APIs directly with their supplying partners. So they're allowing to grow outside of the sphere of influence they have from internal only. Ticketmaster is probably something that many of us know. They handle sales of tickets for things like concerts and different events. They started an initiative called Live Nation, also something probably many of us have heard of before. And their goal here was to grow their partner ecosystem. They already had a pretty well-known brand in terms of selling tickets and attracting communities for this. But what they realized was if they could enable a partner ecosystem to upsell that for them, they would have even broader reach. And so they did this through Live Nation. And PSD2, this is the Payment Services Directive 2. This is a banking initiative in Europe that's a mandate that's come down that basically says that banks are no longer allowed to keep their doors closed. So there's an industry mandate that says banks must create APIs so that different service partners can consume them and use them connected to different retailers and so on, so they have to open up. And finally, a public ecosystem with things like the Philips Hue, right? So Philips creates this light that you can control in a Nest-like fashion, so that via APIs I can turn my lights on or off or change the color of them. So how does all this get delivered? This gets delivered in what we call the digital value chain. As I mentioned before, there's always a back end, and there's back-end services that you want to expose through an API. There's going to be an API team that's going to look at those back-end services and try to figure out the best way to deliver those. Ideally, that API team does that in concert with input from the developer, because that developer ultimately is the one that's delivering the experience in the form of an app to that end user. And you measure the success of your API by virtue of how successful that developer is. And when that developer is super successful, you could transform your business from selling whatever you've been doing traditionally, or developing whatever it is you've been developing traditionally, or delivering whatever it is you've been doing traditionally, to a whole new world and broaden that kind of spectrum. The API team can get input from different places. We have the API services. Ultimately, you're going to analyze kind of some of that input, and that's going to drive new developer services so that you can figure out how to broaden that developer community, enrich that developer community, and that API team will just continue in a circular fashion, in a kind of agile and iterative fashion. And there's a lot of pieces here that are involved, and a lot of this looks like scary technology. But it doesn't have to be that simple. So at the end of the day, your APIs need to be easy, secure, and intelligent. And when they're easy, secure, and intelligent, your developers can quickly create new product areas to expand your horizons. And this will drive your business direction. It's more than technology. It's really about process, people, and technology. So as we broaden these APIs, we enable that development community, they're going to have a wider reach to more people. And as they have a wider reach to more people and we analyze that stuff, we're going to improve the processes so that even the technology itself improves. And this can be confusing. So you can imagine a continuum of different pieces where between your CEO and between your CIO, you might be looking for new funding structures, new business models. So as I mentioned before with those different ecosystems, you might see Live Nation starting by only communicating with partners. Right? They want to grow, Ticketmaster wants to grow its outreach, not just to individual people buying tickets, but to partners that are going to help them and grow that. But maybe beyond that, there might be a whole new business area that they can expand into by virtue of growing this API ecosystem. Customer expectations. It used to be that customers expected a web first, and then they expected mobile first. Nowadays, customers expect a broad group of API services that might be coming from disparate sources. I expect that if I'm going to be able to use a retail application, it's going to look up my location and tell me where the nearest store is. That's probably two different API calls from two different services. And my user expectation is that I'll be able to do that. But this can be confusing. So you need some sort of compass to figure out where you're going in this world of expectations and world of APIs. And to do that, Apogee in the form of a product, working together with our partner Yale Group, is going to try and help you get there. And so we created this idea of a compass to navigate these different areas of vision, alignment, and execution. In terms of vision, the idea here is to take this API, this technology stuff, and make it more approachable to human beings at the end of the day. And so we're going to create a platform where we have products, APIs, and as opposed to looking at this as a exposure layer, we want to reach kind of a layer of engagement, where we're engaging a wider community so that we can learn how to transform our business. In terms of alignment, we want to make sure that we can measure these pieces. So there's a business need associated with these APIs, and we want to make sure we're fulfilling that need as closely as possible. And execution, finally, yes, there is a technology piece here. We want to make sure we develop those APIs, and we do it in concert with the alignment and vision as much as possible. So at the end of the day, we've seen a world where we've moved from web first to mobile first to API first. The API first is a technology drive that can push us toward different ecosystem growth. We can move from different types of ecosystems and ultimately create a navigation framework so that we can accelerate our business. Thank you.